Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I should have known the day would unravel the moment she walked through the gate, her perfume arriving 5 seconds before she did. That same cloying vanilla scent she's worn since I was 12 and old enough to start hating everything about her. The backyard was buzzing with life, balloons tied to the railing, folding tables covered with mismatched tablecloths, my husband manning the grill while kids chased bubbles and tripped over gift bags. It was supposed to be one of those afternoons you look back on and remember fondly, a warm, sunlit memory stitched into the fabric of your child's childhood. But somehow, someway, my mother always finds the sharpest thread to unravel everything you've worked so hard to stitch together. Barbara arrived holding a gift bag that looked expensive but light, probably filled with something more for show than sentiment. Maybe a monogrammed picture frame or a book she never read but thought made her look thoughtful. Right behind her, of course, was my brother Danny, the golden boy himself, beaming like he was the guest of honor instead of the kid turning 8. He had his wife, Trish, in tow, both their kids dressed like they were auditioning for a catalog, their smiles as rehearsed as their handshakes. I smiled when they approached, I always do. That's the thing about family. You learn to smile like armor, flash your teeth so no one sees you biting your tongue bloody. The first hour went by in a blur of paper plates, lemonade refills, and small talk about school and weather and everything except the way I still feel 10 years old every time my mother looks through me like I'm a window to someone more interesting. But I kept it together. I always do. I watched my son, Matthew, laughing with frosting on his nose and reminded myself that this day was his. Not mine, not hers, his. And then came the cake. We gathered around the table, candles flickering in the breeze, voices rising in a lopsided rendition of Happy Birthday. Matthew's eyes lit up as he made a wish. I don't know what he wished for, but I silently wished for peace. Just a few more hours without tension, without that aching, familiar feeling of being invisible in my own story. He blew out the candles, and that's when she said it. It wasn't loud. In fact, she said it so casually it almost sounded like a joke, like the kind of remark that slips out without thought and yet carries the weight of decades behind it. Your brother's kids are clearly the favorites, she laughed, turning to someone beside her, maybe one of Danny's coworkers or Trish's sister. I don't even remember. But I remember the way the air shifted. I remember the way the laughter around the table faltered, how forks paused midair, how eyes darted toward me and then away, unsure whether to smile or cringe. And me? I smiled. God help me, I smiled the way you smile when someone shoves a knife in your side and you don't want to give them the satisfaction of watching you bleed. I smiled because I'd been rehearsing that moment for a long, long time. Not the comment exactly, I couldn't have predicted the exact words, but the inevitable sting of it, the moment she reminded me again that I was the footnote in Danny's chapter. So I reached into my bag, calm as Sunday morning, and pulled out an envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, elegant, something that looked like it might hold a wedding invitation or a heartfelt note. I placed it gently in front of her, sliding it across the table like a dealer in a game I'd been playing for years. "What's this?" she asked, fingers brushing over the flap, her voice still warm, still smug. "Open it," I said, still smiling, still bleeding on the inside. She did. And the moment her eyes met the contents, something shifted. Her face, usually so taut with judgment and self-importance, went pale. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. For the first time in my life, Barbara didn't have a single word to say. And that silence? It tasted better than birthday cake. You don't just wake up one day and realize your mother never really loved you the way a mother is supposed to. No, it happens slowly, like a slow leak in a tire. So gradual you barely notice until you're stranded on the side of the road wondering when exactly you ran out of air. For most of my childhood, I thought maybe I was the problem, that I just wasn't trying hard enough to earn her affection, that maybe if I kept my room cleaner or studied harder or stopped crying so much, she'd look at me the way she looked at Danny, with those eyes full of pride and tenderness, like he was a sunrise and I was just background noise. I remember the year Danny turned 16, and my parents surprised him with a brand new silver car parked in the driveway, complete with a big red bow on the hood, like we were living in a damn commercial. He didn't even have a license yet, but my mother was crying tears of joy, snapping photos while Dad stood beside her, chest puffed with pride. That same year, I turned 14 and got a second-hand bike from a yard sale down the block. No bow, no photos, just a half-hearted, "You're welcome," from my mother and a comment about how I should be grateful because some girls don't get anything at all. That bike squeaked every time I turned the pedals, and maybe it sounds petty now, but at the time, it wasn't just about the bike, it was about the message stitched between the spokes. You're not special, and you never will be. Danny could trip over his own feet and somehow still fall into applause, while I could pull straight A's and still get told I was being too dramatic whenever I asked why nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. It became a pattern so familiar it felt like wallpaper in our house, my mother's voice always slicing through the air with that same condescending melody. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" She asked it so many times I could hear it in my sleep, like a lullaby twisted into a taunt. Danny was neat, polite, charismatic, and practically bathed in compliments, while I was always too loud, too opinionated, too difficult. But difficult is what you become when the only other option is disappearing. By the time I was 15, I was working after-school shifts at a diner just to buy my own clothes because asking for money at home always came with strings that usually ended with a lecture or a reminder that Danny never needed help buying his things. Of course he didn't. He had a wallet full of $20 bills gifted to him like he'd earned them by breathing. I started learning how to smile through the bitterness around them. Not because it got easier, but because showing my pain only gave her more ammunition. I'd nod, say thank you when she handed me some second-hand dress or leftover hand-me-down from one of Trish's relatives, and I'd go upstairs and cry into a pillow so no one would hear. I learned to hold my tongue so well it became second nature, and eventually, I could sit through entire family dinners without flinching as Barbara doted on Danny's every accomplishment while barely acknowledging I existed. You get good at swallowing your pride when you're raised by someone who chokes you with theirs. But here's the thing they never tell you about silence: it builds pressure. It doesn't go away, it just coils tighter and tighter inside you, until one day, it finds a crack to escape through. And that day at the birthday party? That envelope wasn't some spontaneous moment of defiance. It wasn't an emotional reaction or a last-minute decision. It was years in the making. Years of biting my tongue so hard I tasted iron. Years of standing on the sidelines watching Barbara beam at Danny like he was the only child she ever prayed for. Tell me something honestly, have you ever smiled politely while someone disrespected you in front of your own damn kid? Have you ever swallowed your rage so deep it stuck in your throat like glass, just so you wouldn't ruin a moment that wasn't supposed to be about you? I know I'm not the only one. I know some of you out there have sat in those same plastic chairs at family barbecues, holding back the scream lodged somewhere between your stomach and your teeth. If you've ever been the other child, the less shiny one, the one who got the leftovers while someone else got the spotlight, tell me. I want to hear your story too. Leave a comment. Say it out loud. Because sometimes the only way to stop repeating the cycle is to name it. But the real twist? What Barbara didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been planning that moment for years. Every detail, every breath, every ounce of that silence I served her like a final course was crafted with the kind of care only someone truly invisible can perfect. And that was only the beginning. There comes a point in every woman's life when pretending not to notice the difference becomes more exhausting than confronting it head-on, and for me, that point arrived somewhere between juggling night shifts, pumping breast milk in a staff restroom, and watching my so-called golden brother crash and burn while still being applauded for standing in the wreckage. I had spent so many years trying to believe that if I just kept my head down and played nice, eventually I'd be noticed, not pitied or tolerated, but truly seen. But nice only gets you silence, and silence, I'd learned, is the currency of invisible daughters. Danny's golden glow didn't dim with age, it just flickered under the weight of bad decisions and conveniently placed parental excuses. After high school, he wandered through a string of half-hearted ventures, a landscaping business that never took off, A failed podcast he swore was just ahead of its time, a stint in real estate that somehow ended with him owing more than he earned. Each failure was met with soft cushions from our parents, checks slipped into his palm like lifelines, and whispered reassurances that everyone makes mistakes. Mistakes, apparently, were only forgivable when made by sons who looked like dreams and walked like promises. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs, attending community college classes at night, and raising a child mostly alone after my relationship with Matthew's father collapsed under the pressure of trying to build a life with someone who mistook responsibility for suffocation. I didn't ask for help, I knew better by then. Help came with guilt attached, strings wrapped so tightly around your pride you couldn't breathe. So I built my own ladder, one rung at a time, while Danny kept falling and somehow landing softer each time. It wasn't just the money. It was the way our mother still looked at him like he was some misunderstood genius instead of a 30-something man-child with a trail of overdraft fees and broken promises. When he got evicted from his apartment, again, it was Barbara who found him a rental and fronted the deposit, insisting it was just temporary and that he'd find his footing soon. When I finally scraped together enough savings to put a down payment on a modest little house for Matthew and me, she didn't even ask to see it. No flowers. No congratulations. Just a distracted, "Oh, that's nice," before shifting the conversation back to Danny's latest plan to open a craft beer bar with a friend who once got banned from 2 liquor stores. I started pulling away slowly at first. Fewer calls. Polite excuses. Less patience for the obligatory Sunday dinners where I'd sit through hour-long monologues about Danny's potential while my accomplishments were brushed aside like lint on a sleeve. I stopped sharing details about my life, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. If joy is going to be ignored or minimized, better to keep it close where it can't be tarnished. I kept Matthew out of her orbit, too, more than she noticed, which told me everything I needed to know about her level of interest in my child. He was my whole world, and to her, he was a side note. A footnote. Just like I had always been. Still, guilt has a way of creeping in through the cracks, doesn't it? No matter how justified your distance, there's always that little voice, part programming, part trauma, that whispers you're being cruel, that maybe you're overreacting, that maybe this time it will be different. And so, despite every instinct screaming otherwise, I invited them to the birthday party. It was his 8th, and he deserved a family celebration, even if half the family only ever showed up out of obligation or appearances. I decorated the yard with balloons and banners, baked cupcakes from scratch, and even set aside a seat for Barbara, though I had no illusions about what she'd bring besides her signature brand of subtle insults and sugar-coated judgment. But I didn't invite them without a plan. By that point, I'd stopped playing nice. I had reached a place in my life where I no longer wanted validation, I wanted acknowledgement. Not approval. Just a moment of reckoning, a moment where the decades of overlooked effort and muffled pain were laid bare in a way no sarcastic comment or dismissive chuckle could brush aside. That envelope I handed her during the party wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gesture. It was a carefully chosen punctuation mark on a sentence I'd been writing my entire adult life. Inside it was more than just a financial document. It was a mirror. A reflection of everything she'd ignored, everything she chose not to see because it didn't glitter the way Danny's failure somehow did. I didn't do it to hurt her, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the moment her face lost all color. I did it because sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop asking politely and start speaking in actions that can't be dismissed or talked over. That envelope wasn't just some petty move, some bitter daughter's cry for attention. It was loaded with everything Barbara ever ignored, in black and white, clear as daylight, undeniable in every digit and decimal. And it was only the beginning. It's strange how much power a simple sheet of paper can hold when it's carrying more than just numbers. It's carrying years of resentment, hard-won pride, and a message so sharp it slices through every polite smile in the room like a razor. That envelope, the one I handed to my mother so gently it almost looked like a peace offering, didn't contain a dramatic letter or a screaming confrontation. No, it was something much colder, something much heavier. A copy of my son's prepaid college tuition account statement, printed neatly on a single page, with every deposit and every date clearly listed, every penny accounted for by me and me alone. There it was, black ink on white paper, the total amount paid in full, months ahead of schedule, not a single contribution from a parent, not a single helping hand from a grandparent, and certainly not a single cent from the ever-praised golden child, Danny. It sat there in her trembling fingers like a confession, like a courtroom exhibit in a trial she never saw coming. For a moment, I thought she might scoff or find a way to dismiss it, maybe try to shift the attention with one of her usual deflective remarks, some soft jab disguised as concern or humor. But she didn't. She just stared, lips slightly parted, eyes darting from line to line, and then settling on the note I had paper-clipped to the top with surgical precision. "Since favorites get everything," the note read, written in my clean, no-nonsense handwriting, "I'm sure Danny won't mind covering his own kid's college." And that was the moment the laughter stopped. That was the moment the air around the table turned thick and still, like everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. Even the kids, caught in their sugar highs and backyard games, seemed to quiet for a second, as if sensing that something had shifted under the surface. My husband paused mid-sentence, one hand still holding a half-cut slice of cake, and Danny, who had been in the middle of bragging about some new business idea, went quiet so suddenly it felt like the sound had been sucked from his lungs. Barbara's face told a story that needed no words. Her mouth opened and closed once, maybe twice, like she was trying to conjure some kind of response, but the impact had landed too cleanly. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't even about the note, although the tone of it had been chosen with absolute intention. It was the implication that I had done something significant, something important, without her approval, without her assistance, without even her presence. That was the gut punch. That was the slap. Not the statement itself, but what it symbolized. She had spent decades convincing herself that my life was built on luck or stubbornness or even bitterness, never acknowledging that it was built on strength and sweat and sacrifice, the kind of quiet effort that doesn't sparkle but builds foundations. And now, here it was, laid out in front of her like a monument to everything she refused to see. I had secured my son's future while she was too busy praising her other child for barely keeping his head above water. I had ensured that my child would never need to beg or borrow, that he would step into adulthood with dignity and freedom, while Danny's children would one day look back and wonder why their grandfather's wallet had dried up after their father's fifth failed business. And still, I didn't say anything. I didn't gloat or explain. I let the silence work for me, let it stretch and fill the spaces that years of effort had gone unnoticed. It wasn't about humiliating her, it was about holding up a mirror she couldn't ignore anymore. And the silence was the most damning part of it all. Because when Barbara went quiet, when the ever-opinionated matriarch of our family had nothing to say, it wasn't just shock, it was recognition. It was the weight of exposure, the heavy burden of finally being seen not as the wise mother figure she liked to portray, but as someone who had failed to recognize worth until it was too undeniable to ignore. I didn't even glance at Danny. I didn't need to. His posture told me everything. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was embarrassed. Embarrassed to be the subject of comparison, embarrassed that for once, the spotlight had turned and wasn't flattering anymore. Trish kept her eyes low, pretending to smooth a napkin on her lap, likely wishing they'd left earlier or sat farther from the center of the storm. And me? I just sat there and let it all unfold, watching years of buried tension rise to the surface like smoke curling from a long-dormant fire. Because that moment, quiet, cold, and absolutely deliberate, wasn't the climax. It was only the ignition. But that wasn't the end. That was just the spark. The fire was coming next. If there's one thing you can always count on in families like mine, it's that nothing stays quiet for long, and the sound of one awkward silence quickly turns into a chorus of whispered phone calls and side-eyed glances exchanged across living rooms. By the time the last cupcake had been eaten and the folding chairs stacked back against the fence, the story of the envelope had already begun to travel, passed from one relative to another like a rumor too scandalous to keep secret. each version growing a little louder, a little juicier, a little more exaggerated with every retelling. Apparently, by Monday morning, I had attacked my mother, publicly shamed the family, and used my son's birthday as a stage for revenge, at least according to my cousin Jenna, who called just to check in and see how I was holding up, though her voice dripped with barely concealed amusement. And behind that amusement was something else I hadn't heard in years: respect. Not the fake kind people give you out of obligation or pity, but the real kind, the kind that comes from knowing someone has finally stopped apologizing for who they are. Danny, of course, was livid, not at himself, not at our mother, not at the years of enabling that had brought him to this point, but at me, because his image had finally taken a hit. He called me 2 days later, voice clipped and condescending, trying to play the peacemaker while simultaneously accusing me of blowing things out of proportion. "You didn't have to do that," he said, as if I'd pulled some cruel prank rather than simply presenting a document and a truth too heavy for them to carry gracefully. "You made Mom look bad in front of everyone." I let him rant for a while, let him pace in circles through his defensiveness and self-importance, and when he finally paused for breath, I answered with a calmness he wasn't prepared for. "She didn't need my help to look bad," I said. "She's been doing that all on her own for decades." I just stopped pretending not to notice. He sputtered something about family loyalty and airing dirty laundry, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had spent too many years being loyal to people who treated my silence like a welcome mat. Loyalty without respect is just servitude dressed up in tradition, and I was done being anyone's doormat. A few days after that, Barbara called. I saw her name flash across the screen and almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was tight, brittle around the edges, like she'd rehearsed her lines but didn't believe them herself. "You really humiliated me," she said, skipping over any pleasantries, going straight for the guilt trip like it was her signature move. I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear, and waited for the sting to hit me like it used to. But it didn't. There was no rush of shame, no inner voice questioning whether I'd gone too far. There was just clarity, sharp and unshakable. "No, Mom," I said, slow and measured. "You humiliated yourself. I just handed you the mirror." The silence that followed was different from the one at the party. This one was colder, quieter, as if even she didn't know how to answer that. And in that moment, I realized something I should have learned a long time ago: respect isn't inherited just because we share blood. It's earned through actions, through consistency, through the way you make people feel even when you think no one's watching. For years, I had chased approval like it was the same as love, but it never was. Respect doesn't come from being obedient or staying quiet. It comes from standing your ground, even when your legs are shaking beneath you. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, that I didn't need her apology, and I wasn't expecting one either. I said it because I meant it, and because I'd finally realized that closure doesn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in knowing you've spoken your truth and walked away without looking back. And then, just as I was about to hang up, she said something I never thought I'd hear, something that pulled the rug out from under me, if only for a moment. "You were always the strong one," she whispered, voice barely audible. "That's why I didn't worry about you." For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or scream. Was that supposed to be an excuse, a compliment, or some backhanded confession wrapped in regret? I didn't respond. I just sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, heart beating a little louder, brain spinning in circles. Because for all the years I'd spent wondering what was wrong with me, maybe the truth was something even messier, that she saw my strength and decided I didn't need her. But even if that was true, it didn't make the neglect any less painful. It didn't erase the damage. It just left me with more questions than answers. And that was the worst part, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to feel. There are moments in life that don't arrive with fireworks or fanfare, no grand gestures or cinematic music swelling in the background, just a single sentence, spoken quietly, almost offhandedly, that somehow manages to rearrange everything you thought you understood about your past. That moment came to me while I was sitting on my back porch, still half wrapped in the fog of that phone call, my mother's voice echoing through my mind long after I'd ended the conversation. "You were always the strong one," she'd said, like it was a compliment, like it was an explanation, like it was something I should tuck into my pocket and carry with pride instead of bitterness. "That's why I didn't worry about you." At first, I didn't know what to make of it. Was that supposed to be remorse? Was it an apology in disguise, or just another layer of the manipulation I'd spent a lifetime unraveling? There was a softness in her voice I hadn't heard in years, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or performance, and that's what made it so damn haunting. Because the truth is, when someone hurts you over and over, it becomes nearly impossible to tell the difference between vulnerability and strategy. You start doubting your instincts, questioning every word, every pause, every tone, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's a version of the story you missed. I replayed that sentence in my head more times than I care to admit, twisting it around like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Was she admitting that she chose to neglect me on purpose because she believed I didn't need her? Or was it a veiled excuse, a way to justify the years of cold shoulders, dismissive comments, and passive-aggressive comparisons without truly owning the damage? I wanted so badly to believe it meant something, that maybe there had been love buried beneath the disappointment, but I couldn't find it, not clearly, not convincingly. And maybe that's the most painful part, not the cruelty, but the ambiguity, the not knowing. The lingering question of whether your mother ever really loved you, or if she just tolerated you out of obligation, fed by duty rather than affection. Because when someone tells you that your strength was the reason they withheld support, it doesn't feel like praise, it feels like abandonment with a pretty ribbon tied around it. In the days that followed, I found myself retreating inward, not out of sadness, but reflection. I started thinking about the years I'd spent twisting myself into shapes that might earn approval, and how exhausting it was to constantly seek validation from someone who only ever saw what they wanted to see. Somewhere along the way, I had confused survival for peace and silence for strength. But strength doesn't mean staying quiet while you're being diminished. Strength is choosing peace, even if it comes at the cost of approval. Strength is setting boundaries so firm that even guilt can't break them. That lesson crystallized in a way I hadn't expected when I stumbled across an old wooden box tucked into the back of my bedroom closet, a box I hadn't touched since the week after my father died. Inside were faded photographs, worn cufflinks, a few of his old tools, and a yellowed envelope addressed to me in his blocky handwriting. I didn't even remember packing it. My hands shook a little as I unfolded the letter inside, dated almost 2 years before his passing, written in his typical no-nonsense style. He'd written about the family, about his hopes for Matthew, about the future he wanted for me, but one line stood out, underlined in thick ink. "Don't let your mother's coldness make you question your warmth," he wrote. "She's always loved in her own way, but her way isn't always right. Don't let her teach you to doubt yourself." That line hit me harder than anything Barbara had ever said. He'd seen it. He'd seen the pattern, the way she tilted her affections unevenly, the way she made me feel like an afterthought wrapped in expectations. And yet, even he hadn't stopped it, he'd just acknowledged it in a letter, like some kind of legacy warning passed down in secret. But still, it mattered. It mattered more than I expected, more than I wanted to admit. Because for the first time, someone had put it into words without making me feel like I was imagining it. He saw me. Maybe not always, and maybe not loudly, but he did. So now, when the phone rings and her name lights up the screen, I don't rush to answer anymore. Sometimes I let it go. Sometimes I pick up and listen for a few minutes, say polite things, keep the conversation surface level. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I've finally learned that I don't owe anyone more than I'm willing to give. I don't chase approval anymore. I don't try to be the daughter she wishes I was. I am who I am, and that has to be enough for me, if not for her. She still calls sometimes. I answer less and less. Not out of hate, but because for once, I finally like the sound of my own silence. And honestly, I've never felt more free. But still, late at night, when the world is quiet and the lights are low, I sometimes find myself wondering, do we ever truly stop seeking our parents' love, even after we stop caring? Or does some part of us always keep hoping, even after the hope has grown cold? I don't know the answer yet. Maybe I never will. But I do know this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all.